altering your perception. And I decided to talk about this, and there's so much to talk about this. I've already made the decision that this is going to be a multi-part discussion, because in the news lately has been a discussion about psychedelics and their effect on the mind, and how they have been and can continue to be used in medical research and in therapy to help people with post-traumatic stress disorder, alcoholism, many other things. A gentleman by the name of Michael Pollan wrote an article a few years back called The Trip Treatment, in which he talks about the research into psychedelics and how it has come back after being shut down for decades, and is showing some very exciting results. Psychedelics have often been used as sacraments, and we'll talk about that as we get into the history of psychedelics. But what I wanted to point out was that psychedelic therapy has been with us for a very, very long time. Very long time. And it has been with us for a very long time because it literally transcends us beyond those ego considerations. Those ego considerations that, make us hear things the way our biases tend to want us to hear. It takes us out of those emotional, ideological, and even functional patterns. It breaks them and puts us in a new space altogether. So we're going to talk about the history first of psychedelics, and how they came to be here in the Western world. Part of this history, by the way, of psychedelics and hallucinogens, and going back to Roman times, is that they are so powerful that they literally freak authority figures out, because it completely demolishes any ability to exert the typical kinds of control and manipulation that are necessary for authority figures to continue to rule. So you'll see throughout this history how just as research in these areas were shut down and these psychedelics were made to be illegal, the power of this is something that governments, authority figures, people who have a vested interest in maintaining control of others find very threatening. So in this article by Mr. Pollan, and now that led to him writing a book, which we'll talk to more about that too. He outlines a researcher by the name of Stephen Ross, and also a Anthony Bossis, who are doing some research in psilocybin, using it as a form of therapy. And this sort of got him into really getting a different understanding of how this therapy can be very helpful. So we go back to ancient times, prehistoric times, tribal times. The elements that we have in these psychedelic drugs, which include psilocybin, mescaline, have been with us for, I think probably as far back as we can trace. Shaman in tribal cultures used plants that they knew had these properties. They were well trained in these, and so they would mix these substances together to produce an effect that would, for themselves, take them out of what shamans term ordinary reality. That's the ego level of existence that we kind of go through on a mundane level. It takes them out of that and brings them into what shamans call non-ordinary reality. That's the reality that exists beyond the transcendent. Some might say that is the only reality, and that ordinary reality is actually the illusion. But from the ordinary reality perspective, that tends to get flipped, and so people perceive the transcendent state, the non-ordinary reality, to be the illusion. I'm dreaming. This isn't real. And that's done to sort of put blinders on, in a way, to get through the rigors of ordinary reality. But in any case, these substances that are used in drugs like LSD were found in plants. They still are. You may have heard of magic mushrooms. They have psilocybin in them. Mescaline's also something that comes from plants. Shamans also used these plants to create substances, or if you will, sacraments for their patients to help them transcend, to bring them into non-ordinary reality so that they can help access their health, heal themselves in a way. So this has been something that has been part of ancient tradition for a long, long time. But here in the Western world, this therapy technically began in the 1950s. With a gentleman by the name of Albert Hofmann. Actually, it started before that. Actually, it was 1938 when Mr. Hofmann, a chemist, a Swiss chemist, working at a place called Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, was trying to create a stimulant and he stumbled across lysergic acid diethylamide, commonly known as LSD. And while there was some excitement on test animals, it wasn't the circulatory system stimulant that he was looking for. So he put that aside, and it wouldn't be until around 48, 49 when he would experiment with it further and begin to really discover its healing qualities. And so research was continued for over 15 years in several countries, including, our own. And that's where it started. And then, of course, enter Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary, if you're not familiar with the name, was a Harvard professor who was sent this LSD by Mr. Hoffman, and began to experiment with it with his students. And that's where the trouble began. When I was in college, about 30 years ago or so, he had published a book called Changing My Mind, among others. And that's part of the reason I chose the title for today's episode. Because his title, of course, has several meanings. Changing my mind, among others. It's about how he used LSD to change his mind and help others to change theirs, but it's also kind of a statement about changing his mind in public among other people. It was an incredibly influential book for me at the time. I still remember it. And it really illustrated a lot of the truth about LSD. It was mixed in with a lot of, very spiritual ideas as well, because Timothy Leary was that type of person. Now, those of you of a certain age may have your own sort of response or understanding of psychedelics. If you were someone who is part of the baby boomer age and grew up in the 60s, you may either have a really groovy opinion of LSD, or you may be completely dismayed by it because of the basically false reputation that was perpetrated, which led to it becoming illegal. And we're going to talk more about that in our next installment of this topic. There's so much to talk about regarding this, and the research that's been done, and the health benefits that are happening. But bottom line, it for what I'm trying to say for this show is, trying to convince someone of something, trying to change someone's mind. It's a lot of work. And it might happen and it might not. Better, perhaps, to change our own minds